What's going on, everybody? Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video. And of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here, Monday through Friday. Tons to talk about regarding the rotation, especially at the point guard spot with Miami at this point in time. But one thing I want to get into is I keep seeing these, quite honestly, stupid trade proposals regarding Bam Adebayo and if Miami was potentially looking to rebuild, him being a focal piece in that. And at this point, please stop. Whoever is coming up with these ideas, like, no, thank you. The Heat fans don't want it. The Heat organization doesn't want it. We're all not in favor of it. But one proposal that I did see sent Bam Adebayo to Golden State with Payla Larson in exchange for Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Buddy Hield, and first-round picks in 2028 and 2032. I mean, come on. That's absolutely ridiculous. Why would Miami ever take a trade? Why would Miami ever take a trade like that? Kuminga, I feel like, couldn't necessarily fit in with Miami's current roster right now, at least as well as Bam could. And don't get me wrong, the front court definitely could use, one or two forwards, maybe more. But at this point in time, I think it's ironic. The script is kind of flipped. Now Miami kind of in more of a desperate need of a point guard than really a forward. And although this doesn't really allocate Miami trading any guards in the grand scheme of things, why would you trade your cornerstone forward for, a couple of draft assets that aren't even going to pay dividends in the next season or two? For the cornerstone arguably of your franchise, in addition to another solid role player in Miami's backcourt. So I'm tired of just seeing these trade proposals, and who's ever coming up with them, please stop, because I don't think they're very realistic, and I don't really see them pulling a whole lot of assets in the grand scheme of things for Miami. So drop in the comments why you think these proposals, I guess, are finding their way into, certain nooks and crannies across the internet, because I still haven't been able to figure it out. But now moving over to the at least one idea that I think Miami could kind of capitalize on, especially looking how kind of the trajectory of the game over the course of this weekend really went. This one kind of involving Drew Smith. Potentially, I think if he can maintain his health and continue to do what he does best in terms of being a facilitator and defensively being an absolute pest, I think that Drew Smith could definitely see himself getting a bigger role in this Miami rotation, given the injury situation going on with Davion Mitchell. Now Kasparas Yakuchones with a sprained wrist situation kind of going on, and then Terry Rozier also dealing with that strained hamstring. Obviously, Tyler Herro also in the mix, going to be out until at least roughly around Thanksgiving. At least that's what's being reported. So I think at this point in time, I'm not saying you got to dump all the minutes and a whole lot of a playing load really on Drew Smith in the grand scheme of things, because if you didn't remember, 10 months ago, he basically tore his Achilles and has been recovering from that since. So the fact that he was able to suit up and even play 17 minutes in this game really just speaks volumes to his ultimate toughness, I feel like. And, I'm not saying he did anything in this game that was absolutely major. Really only had he shot 3 of 5 and had he had 7 points in that outing. Nothing jaw-dropping, but the 2 blocks definitely speak some prowess, I feel like, to the defensive ability he can show. And if you pair that up with at least the ball facilitating ability that he could at least bring to a point guard, at least a team lacking in the point guard department right now, it's definitely a positive thing that Miami could kind of look towards and kind of lean upon going into the regular season, assuming that Drew Smith could hopefully kind of maintain a lot of his health, not just through the preseason, but, past that December mark. Again, I just think it's unbelievable that it's really only been about 10 months since he suffered from that season-ending Achilles injury last year. So the fact that he's able to take the court, at least be a player in Miami's rotation, and, bring some sort of defensive or really benefit at all to Miami's success right now, I definitely think speaks volumes. And I'm happy that Miami is interested in having him be a focal point in Miami's rotation, at least going into this portion of the season, because if you take Drew Smith out of the mix now, we're looking at multiple, at least in this weekend's starting lineup, there was no pure point guard at least taking the floor to start Miami's game. And I'm not against that necessarily, because definitely having the size in that department definitely, I feel like, helps defensively as well. But also having a point guard like that kind of come off the bench and be able to, kind of bring a little bit more of a pesky defensive prowess, whether it's on ball or, just poking the ball away or blocking some clutch or, blocking some shots here and there, definitely is going to do a lot for Miami's backcourt, especially because of the kinks in the armor defensively. I feel like a lot of those players in Miami's department kind of lack. So I'm thinking that if Drew Smith can maintain his health, continue to show signs of that through the preseason and the beginning of the regular season, can maintain his health, he could definitely see a much bigger role going into the course of the regular season for Miami. And I'm excited to see how that's really going to develop over the course of the season. Fingers crossed he can once again stay healthy. But now kind of touching on another guard that I think Miami could potentially, really invest in, that Miami also showing interest in them over years prior, as Coach Spoelstra kind of alluded to, but really being the first Exhibit 10 player that they had signed over the course of this summer. Ethan Thompson could potentially be maybe that next hidden gem, kind of like a Max Strus or a Kendrick Nunn or a Caleb Martin that, Miami is, quite honestly, has a track record, I feel like, of finding players like that here and there, especially every season. And I think that Ethan Thompson is definitely a candidate to be one of those guys. Obviously, a 6'5", 195-pound point guard with a 6'6" wingspan is definitely a nice thing to have in your backcourt, especially with all of those guys that I had just mentioned earlier being out. Yaku Chones, Terry Rozier, and Davion Mitchell kind of dealing with some sort of injuries. Now, it hasn't been reported, obviously, that those guys are going to be taken out for a sizable or realistic amount of time, especially in the regular season, but you definitely have to consider some of your options, at least what you're going to do in the event that those injuries kind of linger. And I think based on the track record that Ethan Thompson has kind of shown, really kind of speaks volumes to that. And there is one more two-way open spot for Thompson that he could really capitalize and kind of take advantage on. And if he were to get that, then Miami would kind of have the option to kind of play him at least through 40 to 50 games throughout the course of this regular season, and then decide if he would be a good mix for Miami's team or if they wanted to part ways with him in the grand scheme of things. He's coming off he has a pretty successful track record across the G League. In his last season with the Magic affiliated team, he scored a little over 18 points per game on 40% shooting. And then the season before that, he was scoring over 20 points a game. I think it was about 22 points per game during that season. But this past season, making the NBA G League third team and then being in the next up game kind of speaks volumes that he's definitely, in terms of where his play is hopefully headed, is trajected in the right direction. And so when you kind of look at this mixed with what Coach Spoelstra, had to really say about him, it definitely seems like Miami is very interested in seeing how he could potentially work as a point guard in a point guard dependent lineup right now. Spoelstra said, quote, "We like Ethan. We've been a fan of his for a couple of years. We tried to get him a couple of years ago and it just didn't work out. So we've followed him since then. We thought he had the qualities that fit how we play and how we do things. He's had a very good training camp, and he was really committed in September and August, and he just has to keep plugging away. He's very close. To me, he's an NBA player. It's just a matter of, the opportunity and just seeing kind of how Coach Spoelstra would speak on a player that really hasn't suited up for an NBA squad for a consistent amount of time. Really kind of speaks volumes. Went undrafted in 2021 after leaving Oregon State, and has kind of had a pretty good bout, as I just mentioned, in the G League. So to hear Spoelstra speak so highly on him and how he could potentially be a good fit in Miami's roster that is quite honestly in a pretty desperate need for a point guard, at least at this point in time. Obviously, this situation kind of could change week by week. And I know I had kind of talked about Thompson potentially being a solid point guard in Miami's rotation over the summer, but now it's kind of looking like he is a really solid option that Miami could kind of experiment with. Now, don't get me wrong, Trevor Keels could also be that option as well. He, quite honestly, had a much better game than Thompson over the course of this weekend, scoring 12 points in just 17 minutes on 4 of 4 shooting. And that's not to say this one game should necessarily decide that, but Thompson, I definitely think has a very solid track record in the grand scheme of things. And because of that, on top of the praise that is kind of been acquired from Coach Spo, I think that he definitely could be a solid hidden gem potential type of fit for Miami that could maybe do some damage in Miami's backcourt in the foreseeable future, but would definitely have to get those shooting numbers up. Like I kind of just mentioned, shot 40% from the field in that last season with the Magic's of G League affiliate team. So, and in this game over the weekend, he only shot 1 of 6 shooting, 1 of 4 being from 3. So the other thing that was also promising about his game that we did see, in contrast to the kind of not as accurate shooting, was he was definitely a very solid facilitator, bringing in 6 assists on that game. So Miami kind of, I feel like, is in more of a need of a ball handler facilitator anyway. So even if he can't get those shots to fall, if he's facilitating the offense, that's one more point guard in Miami's rotation that could definitely add to the fast-paced play that Miami, I feel like, is yearning to try to get over the course of, or really is trying to develop over the course of this season. So drop in the comments if you think Ethan Thompson could be a solid piece to Miami's point guard rotation, assuming that some of these other guys that I had mentioned injuries kind of linger a little bit longer than many people were kind of hoping for, because I definitely think Thompson has the scoring ability, has the playmaking ability, and if it is the right fit, like Coach Spoelstra says, could definitely deal some damage in the grand scheme of things to other teams Miami is going up against, especially in the regular season. And then if they don't end up liking him at least somewhere through the season, they can cut ties with him and kind of move on. So it doesn't, there's a lot of reward and not a whole lot of risk in seeing if Thompson could potentially be a solid fit for Miami's team. And I think that he's definitely got hidden gem potential written all over him, in addition to Trevor Keels at this point in time. And now moving over to some other news, not necessarily pertaining to Miami, but one of the greatest players in Miami history, LeBron James, announcing that today at noon he'll be making the decision 2. And while I feel like it's been interesting, because a lot of the posts I've been seeing online have been suggesting, oh, maybe this means he's going to decide to come back to South Beach. As much as I'd love to hope that was actually going to happen, I quite honestly don't think this is super realistic. I think he's going to announce his retirement and kind of the beginning of his farewell tour, saying that this is going to be his last season in the NBA. But the Miami Heat fan in me was definitely saying, hopefully he's not done, or if he is going to be announcing his retirement, maybe he would want to retire in Miami at this point. I mean, I think he would probably want to retire in Cleveland before he'd want to go to South Beach, but I mean, he won his first his first 2 NBA titles in the 305, and kind of without that stint, at least with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, his legacy could have definitely been a little bit different, assuming that he didn't go back to Cleveland and then bring home that championship in 2016, or he maybe would not have had as many championships to his name. But we're also talking about arguably the greatest player of all time, so he definitely would have picked up some rings, I feel like, along the way. It's just the Miami Heat fan in me was definitely like, the decision 2, well, the decision 1 meant he was coming to Miami. It would be really exciting to see him kind of double down and in the decision 2 decide to take his talents back to South Beach and help them potentially bring home one more championship, especially seeing Miami or LeBron suit up with this current roster we have. I mean, that's kind of the superstar type of player that Miami would really need to kind of complete their team, and would honestly definitely make them title contenders out of the Eastern Conference. But I really think the decision 2 is just going to be him announcing his retirement, and I definitely think I might be getting my hopes up a little bit, and this might be a little bit of a white hot take. Drop in the comments if you think the comments of him maybe coming back to South Beach for a second go around are definitely completely out there, and this is him kind of announcing his retirement, because that's kind of what I'm thinking. But just a funny idea that I kind of wanted to propose here on the channel. But that's going to do it for today's episode of your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video, and of course subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Thanks so much for joining us on this Tuesday. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great day.